Oh, actually, we are live now, and
Yeah,
I
I
just
noticed that
realized
too.
I turned off my intro. So I hit the start podcast. I was about to start retweeting, but welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I am joined today by Anthony, Will, and Brian, and we're going to go over some wide receiver big boards. But before we do that, Will, welcome back to the channel. It's been a while.
It's good to be here. Yeah, I was trying to remember how long it's been, but the draft season goes by so quickly that it could be it could be 5 days ago or it could be 5 months ago. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and I can see Randall in the chat. So Randall, good to see you. Brian, how is Saturday treating you?
Not bad. Went out with the family last night for Valentine's Day, had dinner and stuff, then had to go to work afterwards, but just got home a little bit ago.
Cool. And Anthony, welcome to Saturday morning.
Thank you. Always happy to be here. Valentine's Day was uneventful for me, but happy to be here. I love being here. So that's my Valentine's Day.
That works. So we are going to go over wide receiver big boards. We have Brian's on the left and Anthony's on the right. And I think the right way to do this is, Brian, who do you have at 1? Then we'll go to who Anthony has at 1.
Right.
And then, Will, you can chime in kind of after each of them goes through, and we'll kind of do that for the top 4 or 5 and then pivot a little bit. So, Brian, who is your wide receiver 1?
Yeah, so it's an interesting class, but at least right now, unless something weird happens, it's Luther Burden from Missouri.
And what about Burden stands out that you like him at wide receiver 1?
I just think of at least of the top guys, I think he has the highest upside. He had obviously had a bit of a disappointing 2024 season this past season. If you go back and watch the 2023 season where, he really shined. He just has some things he need to work on. He needs to improve his route running and some other stuff like that. But, he's a yak threat. He's got good speed, not great, not blazing. He's not going to run a 4.3 or anything like that, but he's got good speed. He's a yak threat. He's physical. He's over 200 pounds. He's like 208, 210, something like that. So it's upside's there for him to be a really good slot receiver.
Yeah, I guess my job is the peanut gallery. I have the easiest job because I don't have to put myself out there with who I like in rankings, but I can just criticize everybody else's choices. It's great. Yeah, I guess I'll make my comment as a sort of in the form of a question. Do you think Burden is slot only, and do you think he is kind of scheme dependent? It feels like he needs to have space in order to operate, and since he isn't the most gifted route runner, I wonder if that's a liability for him at the next level.
It could be. I think it's just that's the scheme he played in Missouri. What didn't help him, and they didn't whether it was coaching or whatever it is, he didn't improve his route running from 2023 to 2024. So he obviously needs to work down that and get better at it. I think because of his size, he can place him on the outside. I'd be curious. I'm interested to see what his arm length is, because that seems to be kind of a prerequisite in the NFL as far as, if you have a guy that's like 30-inch arms or 29-inch arms or something like that, usually this gets stuck in the slot like 90% of the time. But, if he pops up with, 31-inch arms, he can place more outside. It just depends.
Mm-hmm. And how would you compare him to last year's Malik Neighbors? That to me would be the comparison, right?
Neighbors is a lot better. He can play outside. He's faster. There's more. He's got some similarities as far as the yak threat, as far as his build and being physical and stuff like that. And they both are pretty quick. But Neighbors is just on a whole nother level.
Yeah, I just feel like Burden is. I think the hope is you would kind of make him like kind of what the Cowboys do with CeeDee Lamb. Like you kind of just move him all over the place. And you would hope that he could be outside, but also in the slot, move around formations, and then kind of just get him the ball and let him, just be a playmaker. Yeah. But I have the concerns that Will put into question form, where it's just I don't think he's an outside guy. I think he is a slot primarily guy at the next level, and so that does kind of lower the ceiling for me. And also just you kind of touched on it, but I don't think the route running is great. And I 100% agree that Missouri did him absolutely no favors. Brady Cook was not good. The offense was just some of the play calls and scheme designs and stuff like that were just weird at times, to be frank. And I, by no means am I an expert on that, but just watching it, you could see it. But regardless, yeah, that's kind of why I'm like, I'm not as gung-ho with Burden as you, and I know a lot of people are.
Right.
I do think your point about, Will brought up like the Malik Neighbors where Burden fits in that conversation. I don't think anyone really has the top of this wide receiver class, regardless of who they have. Like I have Ted at 1,
Right.
but I don't think anyone would say, like, I think the top 3 last year would have been the top 3 this year. Like
totally.
it's not really a conversation in terms of like that kind of talent. Like Rome, Neighbors, and Marvin were a tier ahead of, like, I have Ted, you have Burden. Some people love Egbuka more, whatever, but there is a clear drop off, I think, for wide receivers this year.
Yeah, I'd say even the top 4 from last year, throwing so Thomas Jr. So yeah, so
I don't know. I think I would to go on to. I mean, Anthony, you should probably have the chance since we lost Jim. I'll just take over the chair for a second. But tell us a little bit about your first pick, because me personally, I would have put him in the conversation with that top 4 from last year. But that you tell us about him.
Yeah, so Tetairoa McMillan, I think part of the reason I have him at 1, and a lot of people have him at 1, is there just is no receiver like him in this class. He is 6'5", 210, but still provides you with pretty great athleticism, I think, for a player his size. He's by no means is he like a burner, speed guy, but he can move well after the catch. He can make contested catches downfield. He tracks the ball well. I think he gives you everything that, when you try to create a wide receiver 1 in your head, Tetairoa McMillan fits a lot of the things that you would think of. So that's why I have him so high. In terms of last year, I think I would say like the top 3 is the top 3. And then like him and Brian Thomas would have been like the conversation at wide receiver 4. Now in hindsight, we see Brian Thomas probably should have been in the wide receiver 1 conversation. But at the time, I had him in like the 15 to 20 range, like on my big board. And that's where I think Tet would be in last year's draft. But because this draft isn't as top heavy just in general, I forget. I think I have him like 8 or something on my board right now, overall prospects. But that's more of just a testament to this class in general, just isn't great at the top.
I also have McMillan at 1. And I'll tell you this. I had last year, just to give you guys an idea, I had Marvin Harrison 1 and Brian Thomas 2. I actually had Neighbors graded the lowest out of that top group. I would have McMillan over Neighbors, but I will preface that by saying, or I will add to that by saying, contextualize that by explaining that I have a little bit of a bias against receivers that tend to play mostly on the ground and work a lot in college in open space that they don't necessarily get whenever they come to the NFL. With the reduction in hash marks and additional speed and size on the other side, it gets more congested. And players and like Neighbors was amazing at, basically he's wide open downfield and makes something happen with the ball. And it's not like he wasn't showing that he was great in contested situations. He wasn't necessarily playing the ball at the high point a lot. He was just taking advantage of the fact that he was fast and they had a lot of guys to try to cover, and he was getting a lot of space. And he's translated into a good football player. I'm not saying he's bad, but someone like McMillan, I feel like, can do a lot of things for you that Neighbors not necessarily can, which is he can make your quarterback look better with his catch radius and his ability to, more importantly, to track the ball in the air, which I think is a really underrated wide receiver skill. When you see them, with in their highlight film in college, you don't necessarily think to yourself, or you think maybe that was a perfect throw from a quarterback, but it may have been that the wide receiver was able to adjust to it, and that's the skill I think he has. And you say he's not a burner, but man, you run 4.4 at the size that he is. I feel like that's a pretty that's better than being 5'7" and running 4.2.
Yeah. Jim, welcome back. Thanks for
joining us.
Will filled in as moderator pretty damn well, I would say.
I was listening to the whole thing. I just had to be off camera. So, so you guys got through your number ones. So
Yep.
do Brian and Anthony, you guys have Egbuka at number 2.
Yep.
Safe, is it the safe floor or something else?
A little bit of both for me. I think there's still upside there, of course. He dealt with some injuries in 2023, so that's why he came back for 2024. I think because Ohio State used him like I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they used him in the slot like a lot. Like his percentage was like 80% or something like that in the slot. But I think because of his size and I think his length is good enough that he can play a lot more on the outside in the NFL than he did at Ohio State. But I think still he's going to play in the slot a lot in the NFL. I think he's got some. He's a good yak threat actually. And then even this year they used him sometimes on some jet sweeps and motion orbits and in the backfield type of stuff. And he actually showed some ability as a yak threat, like just handing the ball off and letting him take it off and be like a running back / gadget type of a weapon. You can use him as that too in the NFL, I think. But yeah, also the floor because he's such a good route runner. And even for a slot guy, he's got good size. So again, like I said, he can play outside as well, I think. But yeah, so I think it's a combination of his floor. He's one of those guys. How do you say? He's got a high floor, but then he's actually still got a ceiling to him. It's not like the floor is here and the ceiling is here. It's like he's still got some room for both still.
And Anthony, how about you? What is it about Egbuka that has you grade him as a first-round grade and wide receiver 2?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Brian said. I kind of, and I said it before we came on air, but he's just a good football player, and sometimes you just have to take good football players in the first round. I don't want to I don't want to categorize him as just oh, well, he has a high floor, so we should take him. I do think there is a world where he could be a wide receiver 1 on a team. It would have to sort of be a specific offense, I think. I don't think he could just walk it. Like Tedero McMillan, I think, could walk into pretty much 32 NFL teams and compete for the wide receiver 1 job. I don't think Egbuka would do that. But because Egbuka is just such a good route runner, great hands, can win in the short and intermediate area, especially just so well. And listen, I don't want to scout the helmet, but Ohio State's got a pretty good track record of wide receivers at this point. It's tough to ignore that. So that at least has to give him a bit of a boost. But there's just so much to like about Egbuka. And in a class where I think a lot of the guys that we're going to talk about are more role defined and scheme specific and things like that. Egbuka is that, but I think he is sort of the ultimate of that, where he'll be a slot receiver pretty much anywhere, and I'll feel pretty good about that. And then can he elevate to wide receiver 1, as a true sort of X receiver? Maybe, but he brings so much to the table. And he can be such a security blanket for a quarterback. I think adding him, I would take him in the later sort of, in the 20s, probably in the first round. But he brings so much to an offense straight out of the gate that I think you have to take him first round.
And who is your wide receiver 2?
Well, I'm just going to say before we get to that Egbuka, I feel like if you're adding him to a team that's already got offensive pieces, he could easily be the sort of the connection juice, the straw that stirs the drink, because he makes your run game better as a blocker. He can do little things for you to get other guys open. He seems like a very sort of unselfish and very well-rounded football player. As was said earlier, you're drafting a football player and you're never going to go wrong drafting a football player. So I have technical in first. I would have, I feel like the next group is pretty tight. I would have Golden, I think, second, or unless you want to refer to, our cornerback wide receiver as a wide receiver. Maybe I have to consider him a little bit further up the list. But yeah, for me personally, I have Golden, who we'll get to, I think, because he's on some of the lists here.
So, Will, if you have Golden at number 2, you're the highest of the three of us on Golden. So tell us what you like about Golden.
Yeah, I feel like he's probably the most well-rounded as a receiver of all the people on this list. So he's a guy that can play all three positions. He's going to do something positive for you at all three. And he has outlier ball skills. He's going to have outlier speed. So I feel like that's it's not scheme dependent as much. I feel like some of these other guys, like if you tell me their landing spot, I could tell you that a guy like Igbukah or Burden could be successful. But without knowing the landing spot and just looking at a vacuum, I'm going to say Golden is the most sort of not only well-rounded, but excels at all the different aspects. That's why I would move him up the list.
Okay. And then Anthony, out of the 3 people here, you are the highest on Jaden Higgins. You have him at 3. So what is it about Higgins that you like him so much that you have him as wide receiver 3?
Yeah, so I think Jaden Higgins, well, first off, Jaden Higgins he has the size and the build of a wide receiver 1. He's like 6'3", 215, but he has the movement skills and the nuance of a guy who is like, 20 pounds lighter. I think he moves so well, and he's another one like Tet where, he's not going to blaze past you as a vertical speed guy, but he's going to be able to win off the line of scrimmage with his footwork and with his nuance as a route runner. Also has the physicality to handle those bigger press corners. And I think he has great hands. I think he is another one where he tracks the ball really well and made a lot of big catches for Iowa State this past season. Him and Noel, who we'll talk about a little later, but they were just like the perfect 1-2 combination for the Cyclones. But I think Higgins just gives you so much. I think there's a T. Higgins element to him where I think he can step in and be just a quality wide receiver 2 next to somebody who can sort of space the field more and be more of a yak guy, more of a speed guy and a separator consistently. But he gives you that size element, that ability to win contested catches. I think there's a lot to like about Jaden Higgins' game. If he went round 1, like late round 1, sort of in the vein of like Keon Coleman last year, I wouldn't be mad at it. Especially in this wide receiver class that I forget if we talked about it on air or not, but this wide receiver class just as a whole, I don't think is as strong as last year. And I think a lot of people share that sentiment. So a guy like Jaden Higgins, who I think has sort of a more unique skill set in this class, deserves to kind of be elevated a bit.
Okay. And Will, who is your wide receiver 3?
Igbukah. So we've talked about him quite a bit. Beyond that, my next guy would be somebody that is on neither of these lists. So maybe that's an interesting thing to talk about, or maybe you want to save that for later for who's
okay. Yeah. So who is your wide receiver 4?
So with everything I just said about versatility and so on and so forth, I mean, versatility as a wide receiver, this player doesn't necessarily have, because he's probably not going to be a slot guy. He probably isn't even a true X vertical threat. But I have Savion Williams from TCU, the next player on the board, and it's because of all the different kinds of things that he can do for you. So in that Igbukah football player argument, I would argue that Savion Williams is an incredible football player and probably just scratching the surface of what a good offensive coordinator could do with him. If he were only a multi-tool thing, sort of like Deebo Samuel, then I wouldn't have him this high. But he actually has an ability to snatch the football away from his body and run slants, and his footwork for a larger player is incredible. So I feel like that's a formula that I have seen work for players. If he only was a wide receiver and did nothing running the football or as a passer or a wildcat formation, if he didn't do any of that stuff and he was just a wide receiver, I see the comparisons to Cordero Patterson, but Patterson didn't have the ability, pure catching ability that Savion Williams has, and he certainly didn't have the sort of ability to separate on his release. So that's why I have him the next guy.
No. So I like that. And actually, Drew, one of the other draft professors, I think Drew was emceeing the event that you were drafting in, Will. I believe Drew has him as wide receiver 3 as well.
Yeah.
So while that may be a hot take, you're not the only one with that hot take.
And I knew that. I saw him talking about it on your show. So I know I'm not in the forest, but it's definitely I don't know. You gotta have a little imagination to figure out how he will fit into the NFL offense.
So Brian, we have talked about Burden, Egbuka, McMillan, Golden, Higgins, and then you're high on Trey Harris. So if there's anything you want to add on Golden or Higgins, feel free, and then tell us about Trey Harris.
Yeah, just to add on those guys, I guess. On Golden, I've actually been recently thinking about it. Like, he has some similarities. I'm not saying he's the exact same player, but he's kind of reminds me some of Davante Adams because he's not like, at least from a physical standpoint, and like a kind of like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Temperament standpoint, I guess. So physically, obviously, somewhat similar size. Adams is a little bit bigger, but somewhat similar size. And then as far as athletically, they're both kind of like a little above average, like outside of like the speed. I think Golden's probably is going to be faster than Adams for sure. Because Adams ran a 4.54 coming out. Golden's probably run like a 4.4 flat or something like that, or 4.45, so in that range. So obviously he's faster, but I mean, there's some similarities to the size. They're not huge guys, not super athletic, but they're pretty athletic. And then, they can do some pretty interesting stuff with their bodies, how they move and stuff like that. Golden kind of reminds me sometimes of a gymnast, which is able to spin and turn and pirouette and stuff like that, catch the ball and do that stuff. He can get you some yak. He's not going to be a huge yak guy, but he can get yak. And then also, like I was saying, with the temperament, he kind of reminds me of Davante Adams. Is like his temperament as a blocker reminds me of Davante Adams too. He's kind of like, sorry, it's in my throat. So he's kind of like a ho-hum blocker. Like he's kind of like he kind of stands around, kind of gets in the way. He doesn't really like put a lot of effort into blocking. And then even Texas was asking him to run a lot of dummy routes, and even when he was running the dummy routes, when they would run the ball, he kind of came off the line like, whatever, like do, taking his time type of thing. But yeah, so I still like him a lot though. But outside of like a couple of those things, and then as far as Higgins, yeah, pretty much agree with what Anthony was saying. Even despite him being 6'3", 215 or whatever he is, he moves around like a guy that's like 6 foot 190, 195. And I think he's got some good speed. I think he's probably going to run faster than Ted McMillan. So he has some deep threat ability. He can stack some corners and stuff like that. He can be physical and all that good stuff. He'll block. So I'd add that about that. As far as Trey Harris, I was having actually a Twitter discussion about him the other day. It's just really hard to project those guys out of Ole Miss, but I like him just because of his physicality. He blocks, his size. He's a good route runner and all that type of stuff, but it's just like that weird offense he plays in Ole Miss. It's sometimes hard to project guys to the NFL because, as my friend Dalton says, it's a Mickey Mouse offense over there, so it can be a little difficult. But I still like his upside, his strength. Like I said, it's about running, his ability to just be physical with DBs and box them out. And I just think like once he gets in enough offense and he gets some time, he could be not a number one receiver, obviously, but he could be a really good number 2.
Okay, and Anthony, the next player you have at 6 is Xavier Restrepo. So do you want to tell everybody what you like about Restrepo and why you have him higher than a player like Trey Harris?
Yeah, so on Restrepo, I think when you watch Miami last year, and this is not meant to, I'm not taking anything away from how good Cam Ward was, but Restrepo was a big part of why Miami was successful last year. He just has an innate ability to get open, catch the ball, and just find ways to make plays and score touchdowns. It sounds like a very simple-minded scouting report, but he's a great route runner. I think he's very nuanced. You saw it at the Senior Bowl. He's able to get in and out of his breaks very well. He's not overly athletic. He's not going to be this, amazing athlete, amazingly fast, that kind of guy. But I think he has the quickness off the line. I think he, like I said, he gets open and just find ways to make plays. You don't become the all-time leading receiver at Miami, of all places, where guys like Michael Irvin and Santana Moss played, without being at least somewhat talented. And I do, he's not going to be a round one guy. He's undersized. Like I said, he's not overly athletic, but he's another one of these. Just put him on the field. He's going to be an asset for your offense, for a young quarterback. So I'm a big Restrepo guy. Trey Harris, people can see I have him 8. I don't think I'm that far off, even though I have him. I honestly, I flipped him. I had him as a round 2 guy. And when I sent you this list this morning, I flipped him to literally like top of round 3. If he goes at the bottom of round 2, I wouldn't be mad at it. You have to like the size, the physical profile, the build that he gives you. He's not overly fast, and I don't even think he's as quick and have as much burst as a guy like a Higgins or Tedero McMillan, just in terms of these like bigger wide receivers that we're talking about. Also, the route running is a question, and like Brian said, I hate to just put the Ole Miss blanket on him, if you will, but you kind of have to, because this has been my thing with Jackson Dart. This is my thing with Trey Harris, and this was a lot of people's concerns with Matt Corral. Like it's just years now where Lane Kiffin is so good at his job of masking the concerns of these offensive players. They get to the next level, they don't get a Lane Kiffin as a play caller, and then they aren't able to perform. And that's not to say Trey Harris can't. Obviously, I think round 2 still gives him a lot of value, but you have to have those questions, especially for a guy who isn't, again, he's not a fast wide receiver. He's a big body. He'll make the contested catches, but he doesn't offer you a ton in terms of the physical traits. So I think you go in with a little concern with him, but he certainly can develop into a solid player.
Okay, so Will, you can comment on Harris or Restrepo, and then you are higher on Pat Bryant and Alec Iomanner. So
yeah, first of all, on Harris, yeah, this Mississippi thing is, I mean, I don't know how you necessarily translate what they did there, but I guess you're just looking at traits, and for Trey Harris, I feel like he might be as good a downfield threat for a 4 or 5 guy as you're going to get in this draft. You know what I mean? Like, he's not necessarily winning because he's just blowing by people in college. And in a way, there's a certain skill to that. I mean, the example I'll give is George Pickens, and I'm not saying Trey Harris is as good as George Pickens, but Trey Harris has a similar kind of combat catch ability, but he has a lot more ability to separate than George Pickens does. So I think you could have a lot of success with Trey Higgins, and I'm projecting because who knows what we're really going to see from him translated into an offensive system in the NFL. Restrepo, I love Restrepo. Like, as a college football player especially, and I mean as somebody who giant fan of Cam Ward. So I've watched every game of Cam Ward since the spring season, his freshman year at Incarnate Word. And I think Restrepo Cam Ward always has a guy like that he looks to, that's usually a little bit of a fighter and a bulldog and slightly undersized and not quite, like the superstar wide receiver. And they tend to have like a bond. So look for that wherever Cam Ward goes in the NFL. He's going to have a guy like that, and you're going to want to have him on your fantasy team. So Restrepo, I think, is like I believe in him in terms of his mentality and his work ethic, and I'm sure he's going to be successful. Physical limitations is what I would worry about. I don't know if he is the kind of athlete that's going to enjoy the same sort of space and opportunities, but as was said, he can get himself open and he can find ways to get the ball, and guys like that are usually very valuable. I mean, I think about the way that Juju Smith-Schuster is used by Kansas City right now, which is a guy to find space underneath. And if I feel like like a team like Kansas City had the old Travis Kelce, a guy like Restrepo working opposite that could eat. So yeah, there's definitely an opportunity for him. Pat Bryant at Illinois, I'm not sure Illinois really had the best offensive system to showcase wide receivers either, but I will say this about Bryant. I'm really interested to see how he performs at the Combine. Combine to me is really useful to see players side by side. Yeah, the vertical speed is nice to know, but just to see them in workouts where you view a guy like Jaden Higgins, and then you see someone like Restrepo, and then you see someone like Trey Harris, and you are able to sort of assess how they compare to each other athletically. I don't know. Pat Bryant, I don't know is going to be that great an athlete, but man, in the All-Star season, he really stood out as a guy that was they were able to push the ball downfield to him. He somehow found a way to get behind the defense over and over again in practice and in the game. So I feel like where there's smoke, there's fire. So he would be somebody that until I get some more information that tells me that maybe he's not quite going to have that ability to separate at the NFL level, or it's more doubtful. Sure looks like he's getting the job done. So a little overaged, maybe that's a knock. Compared to the underclassmen, but yeah, I feel like as far as this list is concerned, he deserves to be somewhat up there. I have Ayamanor higher than him and higher than most people. I feel like that is a system-proof wide receiver. He's proven he can be your X with all the attention focused on him and still find a way to make plays and convert third downs and get open deep and do all the different little stuff that he does. Also, like Ibuka, great blocker, maybe even a more physical receiver than some of the guys we've talked about already. So I like that aspect of his game.
Cool. And then we are back now. I'm trying to remember who was going first, Brian or Anthony.
I was going first.
Yeah. So Brian, you are higher on Pat Bryant, Ty Felton, Ricky White, and Jalen Rose. So that would also round out your top 10. So feel free to tell everybody what you like about those other four guys.
Yeah. So I like Pat Bryant. He's a guy who it seemed to take him a while to kind of develop. He was at Illinois for a while. Their offense did seem to kind of show some signs of life this season. It was pretty bad. I think it was 2022 was really bad. So he showed some signs of development this season. I think his speed is going to be decent. It's not going to be elite, but he's probably 4.5, 4.48, something like that. But he's just so big and he's long. He's got a huge catch radius. He can stack DBs. He can get down the field and stuff like that. He can get a little bit of yak here and there. He's got some physicality to him. So I like his talent, his upside. He's got some upside. I think once you get him in an NFL system, I think he can kind of blossom a little bit like that, or at least a good system where you can get like a good, better receiver coach, kind of develop a little bit more. Ty Felton he's almost like I don't know if I would say a ball clay per se, but he's really talented. He's super fast. He's probably one of the fastest receivers at the Combine. Some people have been saying, some people in the scouting community have been saying he might run like a 4.3 flat, maybe even faster. But he's going to be probably likely the fastest receiver at the Combine. But yeah, he's got downfield. Of course, he can get downfield. He can play. He can block. He can play physical. I think Maryland's offense kind of hurt him a little bit as far as showing what he can do in the NFL, just because they gave him a lot of like gadget type plays, like and a lot of near the line of scrimmage type throws, short throws. They didn't really use him deep a lot. When they did, he made plays, but they just didn't do it enough. They, like I said, they gave him a lot of like throws within like 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. It did not take advantage of his skill set. But again, another guy that's still developing is I believe he's a 6-year senior, so a little bit older. Again, Maryland, kind of similar to Illinois, the offense was not very good for a while, even with Tua's brother, that they were very good. Ricky White, playmaker, a bit undersized. He came in about like 180 pounds at the Senior Bowl. So he's got a bit of a thin frame, small frame. So the question with him is just dealing with physicality. The more physical play you're going to see from DBs in the NFL. But he's got good speed. He's a good route runner. He's got lots of experience. This guy should come in, probably still needs to add a little bit of weight, but come and be a really good player. Jalen Royals. I love Jalen Royals. I've comped him kind of to Greg Jennings with a little bit of James Jones in him, if you guys know who those two players are. So he's like Jake Jennings, but he's got like the physicality of James Jones, kind of what I'm saying here. It's because he's 5'11", 210. He's physical. Again, somewhat similar to Ty Felton again. The offense did not help him at all. The offense sucked anyway. There wasn't really much on that offense. But again, they threw him a lot of short passes, which he can do. He's obviously a yak for it. He can take that ball. He's got explosive speed. He'll, you show him that little short, throw him that little like wide receiver screen and stuff, and he'll take off. He'll get you 10, 12, 15 yards or whatever. But they didn't use him in medium and long routes as much as they should have. So and they only asked him to run probably like 4 routes, maybe 5 routes there. They didn't ask him to. So, yeah. So, but the thing I've learned is over the years is just like, okay, if a guy, how do I put it? Just because somebody doesn't do something on tape doesn't mean they can't do it. It just may because his offense or defense or whatever didn't ask him to do that. So it's an unknown right now. So that's why I'm not docking him for that. But yeah, I like his physicality, his size. Like I said, his hands. He's got long arms for a guy that's 5'11". He's got 31+ inch arms. I think just in the right system in the NFL, he could really, again, another guy that can take off. I think he has the upside to potentially develop into a number 1 receiver. It just depends on where he goes. I think that's it. Yeah, physical guy, 210. I love him.
Cool. And Anthony, you are higher on Jack Besh, Efton Chisholm, and Isaiah Bond. So you can comment on any of the previous wide receivers and definitely highlight the guys that you are higher on.
Yeah, I'll start with just quickly on who Brian was talking about. I'll start with Ricky White because Ricky White, over summer scouting, I had Ricky White as a top 20 player in this draft. I loved his 2023 film, and that sort of put me on an island. As you can see, I've sort of calmed down a bit, but I still think there's a lot to like about Ricky White. If nothing else, you're getting an awesome punt blocker, which is really cool. He blocked, I think it was like 8 punts or 6 punts, something like that. But
I think it's 8 punts and kicks. Yeah.
Yeah, he blocked like 8 punts and kicks for UNLV, which is like kind of awesome. Yeah, and Brian said it. He was a little undersized. I was hoping he'd be closer to the 190, 200 threshold. He was only about 180.
Right.
But I still think he's a playmaker. UNLV's offense is also just very. It's called the go-go offense for a reason. It's a bunch of go routes constantly. So and you can't really hold that against him. I do think he can develop into if he develops more of a route tree and can show off more of that playmaking ability. I like him a lot. And Jalen Royals is in a similar vein where Utah State's just very limited offensively and sort of doesn't really know what to do with a guy as talented as Royals. Then he had the foot injury, which sort of really just disappointed, not being able to watch him for a whole year. But a lot to like about him. And I honestly, if he didn't have the foot injury, I probably would have him as like a solidly second round guy, but that is a question mark that we now have to have with him. So that's why I bumped him to sort of the top of round 3 range. But yeah, so a couple guys that I'm higher on. Jack Bech, I fully recognize that this could just be, a post Senior Bowl sort of love fest, if you will. I recognize I could be falling into that trap, but dude, he just put on a show all week. He catches everything that comes his way. And these are, and I say it's a post Senior Bowl thing, but you see this on tape too. He catches everything that comes his way. Yep. He's a physical receiver. He doesn't separate particularly well, but it sort of doesn't matter because he catches everything and he has such he's a big body, big frame. He kind of just makes himself be open enough to where he can make these catches. So he's another one, not a speed guy, not gonna win with athleticism, but he gives me Puka Nacua vibes where he kind of just can make all the catches. He can be tough and he can be physical. He's very, very helpful as a blocker as well. So he's one of these guys. Just put him on your team and he'll do the things that you ask of him. Also, I mean, it's been talked about, I'm sure, enough by a lot of people, but the losing his brother in the terrible New Orleans attack and the story that he brings to you as a guy, he's just got heart, and you see him play with that kind of heart. And I do think there is value in that when we talk about these draft positions. So I would be comfortable taking him as sort of a late round 2 kind of guy. Who was next here? Oh, Chisholm. Efton Chisholm is maybe to me the most underrated wide receiver in this entire class. I don't think nearly enough people talk about him. The fact he didn't get a combine invite to me is absurd. He's so productive when you watch him. For all you tape nerds out there watching Eastern Washington film, he's just so productive. And the way that he's productive is he primarily lines up as a slot receiver, and he's not even that big. He's like, I think 5'11", 190 something. But he wins with routes. He wins with getting open. He has great hands. He makes all the catches that you want of him. And he has an underrated yak ability. It's not elite by any means, but he has an ability to make plays after the catch, to make guys miss. And obviously, too, he's playing at Eastern Washington. He's not exactly facing SEC defenders. But I do think there is and people get annoyed with me with this comp. I think it's a Cooper Kupp-esque thing. And I reckon Cooper Kupp was bigger, more physical. I 100% recognize that. And also the fact they went to the same school. This isn't just me trying to cop out. But the play style and the way that he just gets open and catches everything that comes to him, you definitely see the similarities in coaching that I think that Eastern Washington had for Cooper Kupp that now they've had for Chisholm. So that I think translates. And that I think if you take him, I have him as a third round guy. If you're taking him late day 2, early day 3, he is just a guy that can come in and make plays. He'll be a wide receiver 3 or 4. I don't think he's going to develop into the Cooper Kupp that we've seen for the Rams, but I think he is an NFL contributor. And like I said, the fact he's not at the combine is wild to me. I think he's actually the highest on my list that isn't at the combine this year, if I'm not mistaken. I think the other 12 are.
And then the last guy was Isaiah Bond.
Yeah, Isaiah Bond. If you would have told me in October that he was going to be my wide receiver 15, I would have laughed in your face and told you were insane. But he is wide receiver 15, which is hilarious. It's hilarious to me too that that's actually higher than Brian's. I'm the guy that's high on Isaiah Bond here. Is wild to me on so many levels. But
what are you trying to say?
I would say that there was a time I think Isaiah Bond more than anybody like moved around the most on my wide receiver board. Like I started the year with him probably as like a day 2 guy. Then there was a point in the year where I was like, oh, no, he should have like round 1. He should be in the round 1 conversation. And then there was a point where he just completely turned off, and all the stuff that you loved about him just seemed to like disappear. And I do think if you watch Texas film and you go back and watch their games, Quinn Ewers' inconsistency, I think, really does hurt Bond and his production and what he could have, some of the plays he could have made this year. But the explosiveness just seemed to disappear. The quickness, the really great routes seem to just go away, and it feels like there almost has to be a lingering medical issue. And I know he had injuries that he was battling throughout the year. It feels like he was never 100% because the fall off just feels so wild to me. But the problem is we don't know exactly what we're dealing with medically, and so you kind of have to watch him watch him in the later part of the season against these SEC teams, and he's just non-existent. He's just not a factor, and that's why Matthew Golden became, wide receiver 2 or 4 or 5 or whoever. Like he emerged because Isaiah Bond disappeared. So I think you have, when you evaluate Isaiah Bond, I think you have to take into account how good he was in 2023. As sort of the third man with Mitchell and the other receiver whose name I'm blanking on right now. And then in the early part of 24, I think he was really good, and then it just went away. So it's a really tough evaluation. I still think you have to bet on him because of the speed and explosiveness that he brought. But yeah, it's a weird feeling I have with Isaiah Bond. So I understand not even having him in the top 15. I get it.
Yep. And so, Will, do you want to add your comments on those guys, and then you're higher on Tez Johnson and Torrey Horton?
Sure. Well, first of all, on Bond, it's like I don't know what to make of it. The difference between last year and this year, I'm willing to try to read into that a little bit, but as you said, without like in-depth knowing the player and the person, and like that's why a combine interview, going to be a huge deal for him.
Yep.
To try to understand the injury situation and just what was going on behind the scenes, because we're never going to know from the outside perspective. So pretty dangerous to bet on that guy since it faded so bad. Chisholm, I think what's not to like? He's a high effort player, a lot of success. He's just, the comparison to somebody like Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp was big, had length, and was super fast for a guy his size, whereas Chisholm is smaller and shorter armed and not that fast. So I think it's like you're going to get the effort and there'll be a role for him somewhere, but I'm not sure he can shine. That would be my reason for not having him higher. Jack Beck, Jack Besh. I love the comparison to Nacua. Like, as somebody who had Nacua number 2 behind Zay Flowers in the class, and by the way, Tank Dell number 3. I felt pretty good about my wide receiver predictions that year. But Nacua has the yards after the catch ability that Besh could only dream of. So you're getting a portion of that, and you're getting some traits that translate for a certain part of the game. But it's hard for me to have him higher. Maybe even he'd be borderline top 10 for me. But it's hard for me to put him higher because I think there are some limitations with what you're getting with him. But as far as the effort and the character part of it, yeah, no doubt. Can't even imagine continuing with what he was doing, let alone doing it such a short time after the tragedy and losing his brother. So yeah, that was an amazing exhibition of Will. For trying to think if there's any, I don't think there's anybody else that we missed. I'll start with Tony Horton just quickly. Tony Horton was a guy that was like under recruited, ended up at Nevada. situation there for him wasn't, he was had some early success, but wasn't really the man. Moved over to Colorado State and became had 2 dominant seasons in a place where there is 0 coverage. You are not on anybody's profile or radar, except for when you play against a good team. But Tony Horton had probably the best hands in the draft. I'll go as far as to say that. I think he is one of those cats that not only has the technique and had the length to get balls away from his body, but is just doesn't miss. So I think that's as a potential possession guy and a guy that you can rely on third downs. I think he's very well placed in this draft class. I think he's a 4.5 40 guy, but he had one of the highest max speeds measured this year in college football before the knee injury. So if his knee is 100%, I'm curious to know if we're going to be able to even get workout numbers from him to know. But you hit 22 miles an hour in a college football game, you're pretty fast. So as far as practical speed on the field, Tez Johnson. Speaking of speed, here's my argument for Tez Johnson. A lot of issues with him. There are drop issues. There are size issues because he's even smaller than some of the guys that have gone the last couple of years that were very small, but he's not that much smaller than, the guy that got drafted in the first round for the Kansas City Chiefs, who had a wonderful season. And he's going to be apparently about the same speed. There's talk that he will challenge for the all-time combine record. So I think the biggest thing is his ability to get open. It's not even a 40 speed. It's the quicks. I think there's a role for a guy like that, even at his size, because he's not going to get a lot of direct hits. They're going to try to knock him out of the game and, take advantage of the fact that he's small because he's so elusive. He's not the guy that's going to take straight up hits and fight for yardage over the middle. But, you run mesh routes or something where you're giving him space against, there's no defender in the league that's going to run with him across the field. So I feel like probably after he runs 4.2 at the combine, he's going to move way up in the perception of not only boards of, experts like us, but in terms of real NFL teams, there's an excellent shot that he goes in the top 50.
Cool. And then Tez Johnson.
Yeah, that was Tez Johnson.
Oh, that was Tez. Okay. Okay. So let's pause for a quick commercial. Brian, you want to introduce yourself to everybody? Let them know how they can find you.
Yeah, of course. As you can see down there, wherever it is, on X, you can see the Be Mafia NFL. As I said before, I'm also on Blue Sky. I write for Gridiron Heroics, mostly about college football and then the NFL draft. Of course, it's draft season, so I have most of my offensive player rankings out, final rankings out. So you can find those there. And then since I'm Packers fan, I've done a few Packers articles. I did put a couple articles about looking at the Senior Bowl, since they like the Senior Bowl. So if that's the wide receivers and edge rushers that were at the Senior Bowls, and kind of narrowed it down kind of to like, these are the certain guys that likely, if they're going to pick one of these guys or pick a guy from the Senior Bowl that at those positions, you know what I mean? The guys that likely, I narrowed down to about 3 guys on each one. And of course, I will be writing for the Cheesehead TV Draft Guide. I'll be doing the edge rushers and also doing a feature article talking about guys that the Packers will not take or will not be on their board, basically due to not fitting their thresholds. Trying to think of anything else. I think that's about it.
Cool. Will, welcome back to the channel. It's been a few months. You want to introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are?
Sure. I'm. You'll find me at Accidental Zen on Twitter, where I offer curmudgeonly takes on football, and especially opinionated takes on draft prospects and the difference between being great in college football and being an NFL prospect, which I think is a often overlooked thing when it comes to draft analysis. I run a site for years called Steeler Fury, which is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan site, but it's evolved over the years into doing a lot of draft content as well. And every year, just 2 weeks before the draft, we'll have a week of podcast of the Steeler Fury podcast, where that week, yes, there'll be some Steeler angles to it, but there's a lot of draft content, and we will do live draft analysis, working through an entire 7-round draft for a team like the Steelers, and cover a ton of players. And so probably an interesting, if not necessarily great, follow during draft season.
Cool.
And you can find me here. When am I hosting the mock draft?
Is it February 28th?
I thought it was March 14th, but it could be the 28th.
Then it's March 14th. I know what I'm doing next week.
I know what I'm doing in 15 minutes, Jim. Beyond that, I got to ask my wife. Yeah.
I'm in the same situation. I don't need a wife to ask, which puts me at a deficit to the rest of the public. Yeah. So, Anthony.
Yeah. And Anthony _Russo 97. I'm on X constantly posting about the draft. And sometimes people like to comment and tell me I'm wrong, which is great, and I love it. Yeah, find me there for all my opinions, be they good, bad, or ugly.
Fantastic. So you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic. No I in Fanatic. The channel has daily draft content. This is Saturday morning, and we are literally podcasting live Saturday morning. So Monday through Sunday, there is draft content here. So every Friday from this point forward, we are doing 32 GM mock drafts. Anthony hosted one. At this point, it was 2 weeks ago or 8 days ago. Will is hosting one in about a month. And we will have other guests come on, and they'll be able to talk about every single pick in the top 100. So those are usually a lot of fun. We usually have a really good turnout. So definitely check us out on a Friday, and you will learn about 100 players and what somebody thinks of them every Friday. And we are expanding that to do 32 GM mock drafts on Saturdays, and then another one every Sunday as well, all the way leading up to the draft. That being said, let's continue with the wide receiver big board, and specifically, Brian, you are very high on Ja'Cory Brooks, and I believe that's the only player in your top 15 we haven't talked about yet. So what is it that you like about Ja'Cory Brooks?
Yeah, so his what do you call it? I guess call his arc, I guess. It's pretty weird. It's also interesting. He started at Alabama. He had if I remember right, it was a pretty good freshman year, and it was looking like he was on the arc to like take off and be like the next great Alabama receiver or whatever. And then his sophomore year, he had a little struggle. And then his junior year, last year, 2023, he barely played. Like he just completely fell out of favor with the coaching staff. I think he had like 5 catches or 8 catches, something weird like that at 23. It's just really weird out of nowhere, random. And so, of course, he transferred to Louisville this year, and he was just the guy, and he took off. He actually, I'll just read off my notes that I have on him. So he has a long, thin frame, but he still needs to probably add some mass. But he gives effort as a blocker. He can line up inside or outside. And another interesting thing I like about him is every route he runs when he's coming off the line, he's running it like he's running a post or bait. He's just got his shoulders down. He's just running hard straight at you. And so like that's, I think, an underrated skill for some receivers, because then the DB doesn't know exactly what he's doing because there's not as many tells to where it's like, okay, I know he's running an out, or I know he's running a slant, or whatever it is. It's just everything looks the same until he makes his cut. So that's always a good thing, because that's gonna mess up DBs, and they're gonna make mistakes, and he's gonna beat them and stuff like that. He could sharpen up his cuts, and then those could be better. But and he used some good route releases. He'll use like a foot fire, some head nods and fakes and shoulder fakes and stuff like that. I like that. And then he has good body control, or being able to adjust to the ball in the air. And then he's got okay speed, not great, but and then I've actually surprisingly seen coming off the line, he's used a few times Devontae Adams' little hop step that Devontae will use coming off the line. He's actually tried to incorporate that. It's kind of interesting. But he's a guy that I think has how do I say it? Kind of somewhat similar to Egbuka, where he has a pretty high floor where he's going to come to the NFL. He's going to be a solid player just because of his route running and all that stuff. But he still has a little bit of a ceiling where he can still get better, add some weight, refine some of his routes, his cuts, and stuff like that. There's still upside there with him. I think he could be a pretty good Z receiver if he can hit all those, hit his thresholds or whatever, not thresholds, but his ceiling.
Okay. And then I miss Sam Brown. You have Sam Brown in your top 15. So you want to tell us what you like about Sam Brown?
Yeah, so I think it's just if you go back and watch his 2023 film at Houston, he really flashed some deep speed. He could be really like just like a deep speed guy, and take the top off the defense. But he's transferred to Miami, and they kind of semi misused him. Of course, Restrepo was the main guy, and then Arroyo kind of broke out a bit. So like he kind of became kind of a forgotten guy. But he still needs some work. I think he can be a number 2 eventually, but he still needs some work, of course, like I said. But he's got okay size. Like I said, he's got the speed. I think right now you come bring him as a rookie, he can be your deep threat. He can be your if you guys remember Marquez Valdes-Scantling, he can be your number 3 guy that just run fades, take the top of defense and stuff like that, while he learns the nuances of out running and just being a better player. He'll physical, he'll give effort as a blocker. All that good stuff. Yeah. And I think that's especially in this class, there's not a lot of speed in this class. So he's one of the few guys that has speed.
Okay. Will, is there any receiver you have in your top 15 that we haven't talked about yet?
You're muted. Well.
You're still muted, Will.
Yeah, you're still muted.
Sorry, I'm researching the person I was just going to talk about. Once Sam Brown was mentioned, all of my top 15 are covered. But I feel like there's some movement between us up and down in terms of the top guys. And other than Savion Williams, you guys pretty much have covered it well. Looking at through some of the people there. The wide receiver from Washington State who transferred from UNLV, Kyle Williams, I feel like is an interesting guy to talk about. He is, once again, played in obscurity, man. You play in the Mountain Time Zone or any place between California and the Mississippi River, you're not going to get covered a lot by anybody. So I do feel like he's got a lot of skills. When he had a better quarterback, he produced more. And I felt like in the All-Star season, he certainly looks like at home with some of those other players. So I know we got a combine invite, which is great. That'll definitely help him. Besides that, there's not a whole lot of wild names out there. Maybe I'm forgetting about something. That's why I was just about to look at my list I know one. Off the field, definite questions. Not really sure about anything in terms of the character or interviews or problems, but Isaiah Nair, wide receiver from Nebraska, I feel like if you just saw the tape, you would be like, why is this guy not in conversation for a top 5 wide receiver? So I think physically, athletically, as a wide receiver, he's right up there with these guys we're talking about. But I know that there have been both off the field, on the field, inside the team, outside football questions with him. Not really sure where all of that goes, but dude can play. So maybe it's a sort of a Martavis Bryant situation where you could draft a guy like that in the mid rounds, and if you get a few really good years out of him, you're happy.
Okay.
Big, makes not only combat catches, but has speed. It just separates, and also, any ball in the air is his ball, that kind of guy. So he's very, very talented.
He's also pretty huge. He's like 6'4", 230 or something. He's a huge guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So Anthony, on your day 3 list, you have Dante Thornton, Kobe Hudson, and Josh Kelly, which we have not talked about yet. So you want to highlight each of those guys just a little bit?
Yeah. So I'll start with Dante Thornton. Dante Thornton is an interesting study because he's 6'5", 214 pounds, I think it was. Yeah. So you would immediately think he is a big, physical, sort of dominant wide receiver. He is not that at all. He is a speed, burn you vertically. He'll probably run like a 4.3 something at wherever he runs a 40. I don't think he got a combine invite, or maybe he did.
I think he did.
He might, yeah. So
Yeah,
if he
I'm
runs
pretty
at
sure
the combine, or if he runs it at the pro day, either way, I would expect like a 4.3 something. He is so fast and so explosive, but he's just so underdeveloped as a wide receiver. His route running, pretty much he runs vertical routes, and that's his entire thing. And I do think there, if you look up PFF numbers, which I encourage you to do just as like sort of a background info kind of thing, but he is one of the highest receivers in terms of like yards per reception and like the deep receiving numbers that he had last year. And there were also times where I'm going to butcher his name, Iamalava, the quarterback for Tennessee, just couldn't get the ball to him. It struggled. His deep ball accuracy was not great at times and would also just take sacks. So there were times where Thornton got open and couldn't make a play because his quarterback couldn't make the play for him. So that it almost undersells him too. But he needs to develop, as a complete wide receiver. He is sort of a one-trick pony right now at this point, and that's why he's a day 3 guy. But he can absolutely develop.
Can I pause you for a second on Thornton? Can I helmet scout? Who's a better prospect, Thornton or Jalen Hyatt?
Okay. I do think Hyatt. I think Hyatt offered more as a receiver a little bit, and I think he was also Hyatt's also better after the catch, I think, than Thornton is. Again, Thornton does just feel like he's going to run straight. He'll run past you because he's fast, and then he'll catch like a 50-yard bomb, and it's a big play, but then he doesn't really do anything else like for the rest of the game.
So Ryan, I heard you chuckle. I heard you chuckle when I asked that. What's your opinion on Thornton versus Hyatt?
No, it's because I kind of agree with you, Anthony. They're kind of somewhat similar players to me. Somewhat similar players because they're thin, fast guys basically who have all this deep speed. But I agree with Anthony. I think even though I didn't love Hyatt coming out because he has such a small frame, and he played in the slot a lot. He's probably a better upside or whatever you want to call it for the NFL. Because I think Thornton is kind of like MVS, where he'll like Anthony said, he'll catch a 50-yard bomb, but then nothing else, or he'll catch but then he'll go out and he'll have a game where he catches this will probably happen. He'll go out and have a game where he has 3 catches for 130 yards, and then he'll have a game where he has 2 catches for 20 yards, and you're just like, what happened? So it's and then it's playing in that Josh Heupel offense. It's a mess, projecting those guys.
Yep. And Will, how about you? Hyatt or Thornton as a prospect?
So hard. Tennessee is another one of those teams that I would feel like is just very hard to understand sometimes what they're doing on offense. Yeah. Offensive line, I think they seem to be running something from a different planet. But anyway, I don't know. Nothing wows me. It's yes, there's talent there with both of them. I'm not sure that either one of them really feels like when you see them as a college player that they just scream like they're going to be, super successful NFL prospect. A little bit straight lining for me, for wide receiver.
Okay, and Anthony, we interrupted your list, but you also have Kobe Hudson and Josh Kelly.
Yeah, so I'll go to Kobe Hudson quick. I think Kobe Hudson is another pretty slept on guy, and I know I have him as a day 3 player, so it's not that slept on. But I think he's a quality route runner. He's got good size. I want to say he's 6'1", and then 2 something, 210 ish, or 205. Yeah. So he's got good size as a receiver. Really good route runner. One of the better, I think, ball, just pure catchers, catchers of the football. I think he has really good hands, also tracks the ball well. UCF had a lot of just quarterback inconsistency and drama, and they had to they swapped their quarterback like halfway through the year, so that affected him. But he was still pretty clearly the best wide receiver on the team, and also too, I mean, they have RJ Harvey in the backfield, making these big plays, so they didn't even really need a passing attack as much. But he was still contributing and productive. He's a guy I think rotational, sort of wide receiver depth piece, but could easily have, the 8 to 10 year NFL career as sort of just a quality wide receiver 3 or 4 for an NFL team. And Josh Kelly's similar in that I think he's one of the best route runners. He's a smaller than Hudson, but he has more of that just quick range burst off the line. He's a super senior, so he is older. He's like 25, but he's been very productive. He was at Washington State the year prior, and then transferred to Texas Tech, and was just another just really productive wide receiver. I think he's another one where I don't think he's ever going to reach that, wide receiver 1 or 2 range. But as a 3 or 4 guy that can just find ways to, win off the line quickly, be open, make the catch, get you a first down, or get a quick touchdown or what have you, I think he can do that. And I think because of his, longer experience in college, he is a smarter player, and it shows that in his route running. It's not just quickness, it's also just his smarts, I think, show up. So yeah, he's a guy that I like, in this day 3 range where I think a lot of these guys are going to be, wide receiver depth pieces. Guys like Hudson and Kelly, I think, do that pretty well.
Okay. And Will, do you want to talk about Nick Nash, Zachary Franklin, and Kyron Lacy?
Sure. Just quick on Nick Nash. Overaged, 6 years in college, late, to the party. It took him till his 3rd year really to have some kind of an impact. But can't deny the fact that the last couple of years, especially this year, was as dominant as any wide receiver in the country, an All-American, even against the better competition. So, the competition level for San Jose State, not exactly huge. But even, the last game he played against Stanford, he was like the best player on the field. So I think you can't discount that as somebody that might be a, safe late round pick, somebody to come in and contribute right away, which is nice. You don't have to, imagine developing a guy like that. He's already sort of gotten there, or at least to a level where he's useful. Zachary Franklin, I think, is a player that I really loved at UTSA. They had like 6 wide receivers, I felt, who all were draftable, were really terrific. And, DeCorian Clark had injury problems that sort of knocked him off the radar of the draft. Zachary Franklin moved, but was, once again, he's very slick. He's very elusive as a route runner and after the catch. And I feel like guys like that have success at the NFL level. He might not ever be, a number 1 or number 2 wide receiver, but I could see him as a 3 or 4 on a team and making an impact. Once again, very experienced player, not super overaged, but useful. Kyron Lacy, let's talk about this for a second. So he's the LSU wide receiver that was charged with
manslaughter,
like a hit and run killing.
Manslaughter. Yeah.
But here's the thing. He's denied it. His lawyer has offered evidence that he is not responsible. So I'm going to say maybe it's a 10% chance that he's not guilty of the offense as charged. So obviously, if he's charged with that, he's going to prison. He's not going to be in the NFL. If he's either, found innocent or found not guilty of that charge and, cops to some lesser charge, he's probably going to have an NFL career. And if you take that off the field away from this conversation, it's a different conversation. Kyron Lacy is a top 5 receiver, top 10 receiver in this draft class, I think.
Yep.
And I think we're getting closer to the point where, we may have an answer on what his situation is before the draft comes around. He's not obviously going to have a combine invite because of the off the field, but something to consider, a name that would be worth mentioning, because if he does come back around to being eligible and interesting, then we should.
And then Brian's got the big finish. So, Brian, feel free to comment on Nick Nash. Then you have Daniel Jackson, you have Andrew Armstrong, Will Shepherd, and Caden Prather.
Yeah. So, interesting thing about Nick Nash is that he actually started out as a quarterback. He was a quarterback at San Jose State for his first 3 years. He didn't transition to wide receiver until 2022.
Yeah, good point.
And it took him a while to get it. In 2022, he like barely played. So yeah, it was really like these last 2 years he really legitimately played wide receiver. Not an elite athlete or great athlete, but he's tall, long, he's got good arm length. He'll just be like a nice possession receiver for you, physical, all that good stuff. Slightly funny story is he's actually originally from my neck of the woods, from where I grew up. He's from Irvine, from where it's kind of about where I grew up. But and also dad played in the NFL, so he's got the genes or whatever. But yeah, he's a good player, like I said, and kind of similar to what Will said. Daniel Jackson, just another solid dude. He seems to be the type of guy that Minnesota tends to put out, is these decent size kind of receivers that are good route runners, just kind of solid all around dudes. PJ Flex seems to be a good teacher as far as wide receivers and stuff. But yeah, just a solid guy, catch the ball, possession receiver, good hands, good route runner, just solid all around dude. I think he said Will Shepherd. Huh?
Andrew Armstrong.
Sorry. So, of course, Arkansas. So that's kind of like a bit of a projection because they're very run heavy offense. So it's just, I want to see him in the combine just to see him running different routes, just see how he looks in the gauntlet drill and stuff like that. Because that's just how do I say it again? The passing game was kind of somewhat simple, and Taylor Green ran the ball a lot, because he's like 6'6" and probably will run like a 4.5 when he comes out next year. So why not let your quarterback do that? And plus they had a couple good running backs. So he didn't get the opportunities that he would have liked or that you would like to see. But he's got some talent. No, obviously not number one or number two receiver. Probably could be a solid number three. Just want to see what he can do at the combine around like an NFL style offense and stuff like that, or NFL, routes and all that stuff. And then, did you say you wanted Will Shepherd too?
Will Shepherd and Caden Prather to close it out.
Yeah, sure. So Shepherd, he was a transfer to Colorado from Vanderbilt. Yeah, Vanderbilt. I think about that for a second. Just this draft class seems like full of these type of guys. Solid, good size. Possession receiver, not super fast. Doesn't really do great at separating, but will get contested catches. Has a good catch radius. He's a little bit of a threat in the red zone. He can get you some touchdowns. A number 3/4 receiver, probably in the NFL. Just kind of, again, another guy's kind of solid all around. Doesn't really stand out in one area. Prather is interesting. He's like 6'4", 210, I think, and he's 6'4", 210, and he's expected to run like in the 4.5-ish range, or not 4.5, like 4.4, 4.45 range. And for a guy that big, he's really quick. He's really bendy. He moves like a guy a lot smaller. Again, he moves like a guy that's like 5'11". And even coming into the season, coming off of summer scouting, a lot of people thought he was going to have a huge breakout year this year, and he was going to vault to the first round, second round, whatever. And he just couldn't put together. But the talent was there. I think the question is, will it develop, because he is an older player. But he's a guy you take, middle, late day 3 and just throw him in this and see if he can become something. If not, you can at least get like a decent, number 3, number 4 receiver out of him, just because of his size, his speed, his ability to move and stuff like that. You can probably throw him out as a kick returner and just do some different like gadget type stuff with him. But yeah, he's a guy who's going to have a role in the NFL. It just depends on if he can reach like his ceiling.
Well, and then I also realized that apparently Brian created a graphic for 16 through 23, and I don't know that I included it on the podcast. So Brian going deep on his wide receiver board. Brian, that is much appreciated. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So this has been a really good 80 minutes. I appreciate, we've covered a lot of wide receivers here, right? Because if you look at the difference between Brian's board and Anthony's board with the screenshots, there were players that one had in the top 15 that the other did not. And I think pre-draft, pre-show, we were talking about that, where there's probably a span of, let's say, from player 75 to player 150, where somebody may have the player at 150 and somebody else is going to have that same player in their top 100. I think there's a lot of volatility there at the back end. I would say the early day 3 grades, I think there's significant volatility in that. And I think just looking at the wide receiver boards was a great example of that. So,
and I think, Jim, it's worth noting that combine. This is pre-combine. The combine and pro days will sort some of the guys with similar grades. Where you might start to believe in your own judgment more when you see that their combine performance sort of backs that up, or vice versa.
Yeah. So I've got a busy day. I'm actually visiting a friend in Washington, D.C. So I'm about to go on the John Wilkes Booth Escape Route Tour. So I'm actually really looking forward to that. So
watch out for the rats. They're still there. The alleyway was a famous story. The alleyway behind Ford Theater, George Azardot, Booth's accomplice, was supposed to have a horse waiting for him at the backstage door. And instead, Azardot was desperately afraid of rats. And there were so many rats in the alleyway that he waited for him down the street. So when you look, you'll see how far away it is where the horse was. And the guy with the broken leg had to hobble down to get to the horse. And I was in that same alleyway about 15 years ago, and it was full of rats. So good luck.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate the heads up for the rats, because I'm not a rodent kind of guy. So I appreciate the heads up.
Why does it have to be rats?
Bring a stick with you. Or bat.
Exactly.
So, as we stated before, the channel has daily draft content. I appreciate seeing Anthony and Brian here every Saturday morning. So, you guys, thank you very much. Will, 10 minutes before the podcast, Twitter chatter, hey, come on the podcast, let's talk about it. And here you are.
That's what I get for chastising Anthony. No.
Yeah, you see, you have to learn who you're responding to on Twitter. You might be dragged onto a podcast sometime.
I know. People chastise me all the time. I know how it is.
Yeah. So, Anthony, I guess I forgot that you came on and did a draft team with us, because that was where you and Will met. And I completely forgot about that. So apparently my brain is not functioning as well as it needs to be. But anyways, for the 37 podcasters at the Draft Professor, for Will coming on as a guest, for everybody watching, thank you very much. Enjoy your Saturday, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.